Hello, and welcome to Wesley United Methodist Church of Trenton, Missouri. Our church is located at 113 East 9th Street, which is on the corner of 9th and Washington in Trenton, Missouri. You can call our office between the hours of 9 a.m. to 3 p.m. Central Standard Time, Monday through Friday at 660-359-6762, or visit our website at wesleyunitedmethodist.us. Now we invite you to open your heart, mind, and body to the Word of God with Reverend Barry Boulware.
While you are standing, there's a young lady that we owe our appreciation to. Last semester she pulled a 4.0. Rose, hold up your hand. Babe Roy told me that right before worship, and I looked at Babe and I said, you know, I never had that problem. Way to go, Rose. Way to go. We are in John's Gospel, the 11th chapter, and I begin with the first verse. If you're reading along with me in the text itself, I'm going to be jumping just a little bit because this story can be quite long and I want to shorten it. Now, a man named Lazarus was sick. He was from Bethany, the village of Mary and his sister Martha. So the sister sent word to Jesus, Lord, the one you love, Lazarus, is sick. When he heard this, Jesus said, this sickness will not end in death. No, it is for God's glory, so that God's Son may be glorified through it. Jesus loved Martha and her sister and Lazarus. Yet when he heard that Lazarus was sick, he stayed where he was 2 more days. After he had said this, he went on to tell them, our friend Lazarus has fallen asleep, but I'm going there to wake him up. His disciples replied, Lord, if he sleeps, he will get better. Jesus had been speaking of his death, but his disciples thought he meant just natural sleep. So then he told them plainly, Lazarus is dead. It has happened. And for your sake I am glad I was not there, so that you may believe, but let us go to him. On his arrival, Jesus found that Lazarus had already been in the tomb for 4 days. Bethany was less than 2 miles from Jerusalem, and many Jews had come to Martha and Mary to comfort them in the loss of their brother. When Martha heard that Jesus was coming, she went out to meet him, but Mary stayed at home. Lord, Martha said to Jesus, if you had been here, my brother would not have died. Jesus said to her, your brother will rise again. Martha answered, I know he will rise again in the resurrection at the last day. Jesus said to her, I am the resurrection and the life, and he who believes in me will live, even though he dies, and whoever lives and believes in me will never die. Do you believe this? Yes, Lord, she told him. I believe that you are the Christ, the Son of God, who has come into the world. And after she had said this, she went back and called her sister Mary. The teacher is here, she said, and is asking for you. When Mary heard this, she got up quickly and went to him. When the Jews who had been with Mary in the house comforted her, noticed how quickly she got up and went out, they followed her, supposing she was going back to the tomb to mourn. When Mary reached the place where Jesus was and saw him, she fell at his feet and said, Lord, if you had been here, my brother would not have died. When Jesus saw her weeping, and the Jews who had come along with her also weeping, he was deeply moved in spirit and troubled. Where have you laid him? He asked. Come and see, Lord, they replied. Jesus wept. Then the Jews said, see how he must have loved Lazarus? But some of them said, could not he who opened the eyes of the blind man have kept this man from dying? May God truly bless this reading of his holy written word. There is an expression that we hear sometimes, and it's at the heart of today's message. Here it is. I feel your pain. Politicians clinicians say it, well-meaning friends say it, family members say it, and sometimes even a caring physician will say it. It means, I know you're hurting, and I'm hurting for you. Do you remember that story when Moses was called by God to the burning bush? First, God introduced himself as being God the Father of Abraham and Isaac and Jacob. And then the Lord said, I have indeed seen the misery of my people in Egypt. I have heard them crying out because of their slave drivers, and I'm concerned about their suffering. I like the Peterson translation, which reads, I've taken a good long look at the affliction of my people in Egypt. I've heard their cries for deliverance from their slave masters. I know all about their pain. God is like that. God's Son is like that. The Declaration of Independence is not a long document at all, and yet it says so much. The Gettysburg Address is not a long speech at all, and yet it says so much. In this text, two words are revealing. Jesus wept. He got the news that his friend Lazarus had died, and then he cried. But Jesus wept, I think, not only for Lazarus, he cried for Mary and Martha too. The text reads, when Mary reached that place where Jesus was and saw him, she fell at his feet. When he saw her weeping and the Jews who had come along with her also weeping, he was deeply moved in spirit and troubled. Jesus wept. Was Jesus feeling their pain? Clearly he was. Their pain was his pain. There's another side to this story that will soon play itself out, and of course I didn't read the story far enough along for us to even get into it. But at the moment where we were reading the story today, Mary and Martha don't know anything about what is to come. Had Jesus left what he was doing 4 days ago and headed straight for Lazarus' home, he would have arrived there before death. But Jesus didn't do that, did he? In fact, he intentionally did not do that. Simply stated, Jesus let his friend die. Jesus knew all along that he was going to let Lazarus die. And he knew that he would then resurrect him in front of Martha and Mary and all of the mourners, friends of the sisters who were there, and most of all, right in front of those disciples as well. And that's what Jesus did. But knowing how this story was going to end with Lazarus' resurrection, that didn't keep Jesus from truly feeling the pain of Mary and Martha's grief. Yes, Jesus wept. We're talking here about empathy, feeling someone else's pain. Some people have empathy as a gift given to them by God. But here's the thing about empathy. It can be learned if someone is willing to work at it. There are warm personalities and there are cold personalities. But empathy can be learned if desired. Someone might say, well, all of this feeling stuff just isn't my way. Maybe as a child there was no one around that they could really talk to about their own hurts and disappointments. Maybe as an adult that same person had their own feelings stomped on and discounted. There can be many reasons why someone might say, all this feeling stuff just isn't my way. But this much I know for sure. God made us with emotions and with feelings. And even the cold personality type person has emotions, feelings. And the only bad emotions are the ones that never seem to get shared. Judy Hansen and I, as you know, are in charge of Kids Quest on Tuesday afternoon for 2 hours with the kids. And she's doing such an outstanding job teaching them songs. They love Judy. There's one child who comes. Their family doesn't so much belong to our church, but he comes, and we're very glad that he comes. Not every week, but he won't go any further than 2 weeks. One little boy will always tell us, "Did you know that my mom died?" And she did. She was killed in an accident. And he'll come up to us and he'll tell us that again and again and again. I don't think he is telling us now so that we have that as information. We know that already, and he knows that we know that. I think that little boy is telling us week after week because it's his way of saying, "I hope you'll understand me. I hope you'll care about me. I hope you'll be with me." And that's the only way he knows how to let that out. All this feeling stuff just isn't my way. If that little boy isn't heard, isn't understood, isn't appreciated, in time, it would be very easy for him to grow up and make that kind of statement. All this feeling stuff just isn't my way. Since, as the Bible says, we are created in the image of God, then the DNA of any Christian will include not only the need for others to show us empathy, but for us to show other people empathy as well. I cannot express this too much. Maybe for you, empathy just doesn't come easy. But again, empathy can be learned. Empathy can be extended to another person if you and I are willing to temporarily suspend our own agenda. In Marion Wright Edelman's best-selling book, The Measure of Our Success, she has a chapter entitled, "A Letter to My Sons." It includes the following remarkable paragraph. She writes to them, "I seek your forgiveness for all the times I talked when I should have listened, got angry when I should have been patient, acted when I should have waited, feared when I should have been delighted, scolded when I should have encouraged, criticized when I should have complimented, said no when I should have said yes, and yes when I should have said no. I did not know a whole lot about parenting or how to ask for help. I often tried too hard and wanted and demanded so much, and mistakenly sometimes tried to mold you into my image of what I wanted you to be, rather than discovering and nourishing you as you emerged and grew." As parents, we know what Mrs. Edelman is saying here, don't we? But as Christians, we know it as well. Sometimes it is just difficult to suspend our own agenda and the time frame that we've got to get things accomplished in, and get into someone's head and into their heart. To take the time to understand their point of view, to see things from their eyes rather than from our own, to take off our own shoes and to put theirs on. But that's what empathy is all about. Yes, it does require a little time, but helping someone feel understood can be timeless. It says to another person, "You're important. What you feel matters. You matter to me." The Apostle John does not leave any question at all about how Mary is going to respond to all that Jesus does here, particularly after he resurrects her brother. He records the story, John does, when Jesus was a few weeks later at the home of Lazarus. Martha had prepared a meal for him, and Jesus was enjoying a conversation with the resurrected Lazarus. Then Mary appeared with a vial of perfume that cost the equivalent of an average worker's yearly wage. Without a word, she opens that vial at his feet, lovingly washes his feet, and caresses them with the oil. And she dried his skin with her very own hair. She knew this would raise questions among other people, but she had thought and thought about how she would be able to say thank you to Jesus for what he had done with Lazarus. And this was her way. It was her way of saying to Jesus, thank you for being there when we needed you the most. Thank you for touching my heart. We are Christians. That means we follow Jesus. That means that we try our best to live as he lived his life. Expressing empathy for some doesn't require as much work as it does for others. What comes naturally for some just doesn't for everyone. But for all, expressing empathy will require that we temporarily suspend our own agenda. You know, you walk into the office sometime up here, and sometimes Kathy and I are walking around so fast, we're trying to get our own little agendas done, that if you run into us in the hallway, we'd probably knock you over, we're going so fast. And yet it is that kind of speed, that kind of an agenda that has got to stop on a dime sometimes. But that's the way it is for all of us, every one of us, to halt our own agenda and realize what is standing right in front of me is the most important thing in this whole world from God's point of view, and to give that time. The ultimate act of empathy was when God became one of us in Jesus. Here, God began to understand life from the perspective of you and me. Here, God put on our shoes. But God's empathy goes deeper than merely understanding what it's like to be you and me. Remember that story of Moses calling that we began with just a few minutes ago? On top of that mountain, God calls Moses and he introduces himself. I am God, the Father of Abraham, Isaac, Jacob. And then he says, I've seen the afflictions of my people in Egypt. Well, that's where we ended the story. That story goes on. It is then when God said to Moses, so I have come down to rescue the people from the hand of the Egyptians and to bring them up out of that land into a good and spacious land, a land flowing with milk and honey. Empathy for God sometimes is not just to understand us. Folks, it's to rescue us and to save us. And sometimes to save us from ourselves. It involves doing for another person what they cannot do for themselves. That's what God's empathy is like. Seldom does our empathy for another person require a doing for him or her. Usually it only requires being with him or her. But Jesus didn't come simply to listen to Mary and Martha's grief. As important as that was, Jesus came to listen to their grief and to resurrect their brother. That was an action, an act of grace. That was not being with, that was more. That was a doing for type of thing. God's empathy is a listening ear, an understanding heart, an action of grace. More times than not, if some action is needed on our part as we express empathy to another person, it can be a prayer that we share with them, asking for God's help. I close with this story. It goes that a certain Boy Scout wanted to earn his Eagle Award. And my, does Troop 99 pump out the Eagles. We are so proud of our history in that regard. So this would-be Eagle went to the minister of his church and asked, well, what project might he do around the church that he could then use as his project to earn his Eagle? The minister gave him the name of a certain elderly man in the congregation who had gone blind recently. And the minister told the scout that the elderly man is trying to find someone who would come on a scheduled basis and just read parts of the Bible to him out loud. And the scout thought, I can do that. I can do that. And so the scout and the elderly man got together for the first time. The scout asked the man, where would you like for me to begin? You want me to begin at the first book of Genesis? Or where would you like for me to begin reading? And he said, let's begin with the first gospel, Matthew's gospel. And so the scout began to read Matthew's gospel. And just within that first chapter, the scout got to that part where all of those begots are found. You know, Abraham begot Isaac, and Isaac begot Jacob. There's 17 verses of begots in the first chapter of Matthew's gospel. And so the scout thought to himself, well, this is okay, but let's get to the good stuff. And so he jumped ahead to chapter 2. And the old man caught him and said, no, don't do that. Go back and read each one of these begots. Read them one by one. And so the scout began reading them one by one. And he looked over and he saw that there were tears coming from this old man's face. The scout was thinking to himself, I have no idea why this is bringing him emotion like that. So at the end of the reading, the scout turned to the elderly man and said, pardon me, but what's so emotional about a list of names? And the man said, you know, son, God must have known every one of those people. He even knew them by name. And he said, it makes me feel good to know that maybe God knows me too, and even knows me by my name. Empathy helps someone else know that you know them, that you know them through and through. Empathy also reminds that other person that God knows them too. Amen.
Thank you for joining us on our pre-recorded Sunday morning service. If you would like a copy, you can contact the office at 660-359-6762 or email us at wesleyum@sbcglobal.net. Feel free to visit us in person or online at wesleyunitedmethodist.us, where you will always find open hearts, open minds, and open doors. May the blessings of Jesus Christ be upon you in every aspect of your life.